Hello, I'm Gary Bettinson. On this video you're going to hear from me and two of my fellow lecturers in film studies, Dr. Mariam Gulbankarimi and Dr. Bruce Bennett. The purpose of this short video is to briefly describe the kinds of film studies courses or modules that you could study here at Lancaster. Our film studies degree encompasses all types of filmmaking, from mainstream popular movies to independent cinema and avant-garde or experimental films. It encompasses a wide array of genres, from documentary and animation to action, blockbusters and romantic comedies. And it covers films from all around the world and from across film history, from the silent era to the present day. So what follows is a summary of just a few of our film modules to give you a flavour of the topics and approaches that we focus on here at Lancaster. Our module on Hong Kong cinema explores the various action genres that have come to prominence since the 1970s. The martial arts movies starring Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, the gunplay crime sagas directed by John Woo, kung fu comedies like Shaolin Soccer, and swordplay dramas like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But Hong Kong cinema has a long and distinguished tradition of art films, of ghost stories, of exploitation movies, and we examine these cinematic traditions in detail too. Many Hong Kong films borrow from Hollywood movies, but likewise Hong Kong films have directly influenced Hollywood directors, from Quentin Tarantino to Martin Scorsese, and this cross-cultural influence is something that we explore throughout this module. And of course we consider how Hong Kong films have shaped and been shaped by historical and social forces, from the 1997 handover of Hong Kong to mainland China, through the SARS epidemic of 2003, to the more recent public protests for democracy and civil rights. Above all, this course sets out to demonstrate what makes Hong Kong cinema innovative and unique. Another module offers a historical survey of the comic book movie genre. Our history begins in the late 1930s, when the first superhero was created. It proceeds through the 1940s, when the first movie adaptations of superhero comic books appeared. This was the decade in which B-movie serials were based on the exploits of Superman, Batman and Robin, and Captain America. Our historical overview continues right up to the present day to reveal how the comic book movie came to occupy the economic centre of Hollywood filmmaking. On this course we chart the changing traits of superheroes across history, a process known as revisionism. How, for example, Batman transformed from a camp, child-friendly do-gooder in the 1960s to a brooding vigilante in the 1980s. We track historical shifts in gender representation, how Lois Lane, for instance, changed from a sex object and a dutiful housewife in the 1950s comics to an independent, empowered woman in more recent screen incarnations. We consider how comics and movies responded to cultural shifts in the visibility of racial, ethnic, and sexual minorities. We also examine how comic book movies have represented or evoked actual historical events, such as World War I in Wonder Woman, and 9/11 in certain Marvel and DC movies. And of course we trace the origins of these all-powerful heroes to the popular myths and legends of ancient times.
In the short film production module, students produce a 5 to 7 minute short film from scratch, working in small production groups. Students learn about 5 stages of production, but for this module, students only need to complete pre-production, production, and post-production, because anyone taking the module has the green light and support to make a short film. And as for the final stage, we encourage the students to consider the life of their films after the module ends. At least the film will form part of their future demo reels and portfolios. In the first few weeks of class, students learn about industry standards and the roles and responsibilities of the key roles in a given film production. Students in small groups will receive camera and lighting training to learn how to use industry standard digital cameras and lightweight lighting equipment. Students also receive training in sound recording and post-production techniques. Applying the knowledge gained from the other core film modules, students focus on how to tell stories in the short format. Short films usually act as the filmmaker's calling card. For instance, Andrea Arnold's short film Wasp, winning the Oscars, garnered her support for her first feature film Red Road. In this module, each student gets to write a short script and receive feedback. But ultimately, the production groups themselves select the script they will produce. Our students benefit from the support of our technical staff when it comes to booking and using professional film equipment. Students will receive support and ongoing feedback from their tutors on every step of the production until the film is complete. The documentary film practice module, in terms of the workshops and trainings offered to students, follows a similar structure as the short film production. Working in small groups, students will produce a short documentary film. This module beautifully follows the documentary history and theory module, in which students learn about different modes of documentary filmmaking. In the documentary film practice module, students are expected to put this theory into practice. In this module, students also receive training on different techniques necessary to make documentaries. They also get to make a short 2-minute character profile, which will prepare them to work with social actors for their main documentary project. After completing their research and having made contact with their social actors, students will pitch their ideas to the entire class as a group, receive feedback, and make the necessary adjustments, and then dive into production. Besides keeping in mind the time scale and the feasibility of the project, there is no limit in what kind of documentary students can make for this module.
In order to understand why films represent the world in the way that they do now, we need to appreciate the decisions made by filmmakers in the past. Our module on silent cinema goes back to the very beginnings of the medium in the late 19th century to explore how Victorian inventors and industrialists made the first films, screening them in theatres, fairgrounds and church halls to audiences who were amazed by the spectacle of moving photographs. We go on to examine the first attempts by filmmakers to tell stories on film, such as the globally popular fantasy and science fiction films of French magician Georges Méliès. We also look at the development of the film industry in the early 1900s, driven by the explosive spread of Nickelodeons across the US from 1905 onwards. Having studied cinema's origins, we go on to examine the two key genres of early film, the melodrama and the slapstick comedy. We look at D.W. Griffith, one of the most famous American directors of melodramas in the 1910s and 20s, as well as Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, actor-directors who took the crude form of violent comedy based on chases and fights and refined it into some of the most sophisticated and subtle cinema ever made. Cinema is an international medium that developed in diverse ways in different countries, and so we also look at British documentaries and feature films. And we finish by looking at the beginnings of sound cinema in 1927 and the work of one of the most innovative German directors, Friedrich Murnau, who made a series of groundbreaking films in Germany before moving to Hollywood in search of greater opportunities. In our module Women Filmmakers, we examine the history of cinema from a different perspective than that usually taken by film historians, looking at the often overlooked but vital role that women directors have played in the development of cinema. The module looks at the work of women in a variety of contexts, from art cinema to mainstream commercial film. We begin with the French director Alice Guy Blaché, who directed the world's first fiction film in 1896, set up a studio in New York and made over 600 films in the course of her career. We move on to look at Dorothy Arzner, one of the only women directors who made films in Hollywood in the 20s and 30s and specialized in sharp, ironic comedies and romances. We then study Ida Lupino, a star actor who set up her own production company and wrote and directed B-movies in the 40s and 50s dealing with topics Hollywood wouldn't touch, such as abortion, adultery, sexual assault and dysfunctional families. Moving closer to the present, we look at Kathryn Bigelow, the contemporary Hollywood director and first woman to win a Best Picture Oscar, who's reworked the traditionally masculine genre of the action film. Looking outside the mainstream, we study the dreamlike experimental films of Maya Deren, the avant-garde feminist films of British director Laura Mulvey, the Nazi propaganda of Leni Riefenstahl from the 1930s, the globe-trotting stories of Indian filmmaker Meera Nair, and the boundary-breaking work of Iranian director Marzieh Meshkini. And we finish this module bringing this history right up to date by focusing on the British director Lynn Ramsay, who may not be a household name, but has made some of the most disturbing and unforgettable films of the last 20 years.